The night of November 30th, 1942, off the northwestern coast of Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Roland West backed the throttles of PT-109 until the engines murmured just above idle. The three Packard 12-cylinder marine engines, each capable of producing 1,500 horsepower, now rumbled softly in the dark, their exhaust barely breaking the surface of the water. Around him, four other PT boats drifted in complete silence. Crews peered into the black horizon, waiting for the telltale signs of the Tokyo Express. The men had their own names for it: the Rat Run, the Tokyo Express. The Japanese Navy called them high-speed transport missions, a sterile phrase for what had become a deadly lifeline for their garrison on Guadalcanal. Every few nights, Japanese destroyers and fast cruisers would tear through the channel between the Solomon Islands, unload supplies and troops under the cover of darkness, and dash back north before dawn, safely beyond the reach of American bombers. The pattern had become grimly predictable: they came fast, they came often, and until recently, they came without consequence. West and his men had been at this for 6 weeks now, operating out of Tulagi Harbor, just across the sound from Henderson Field. His boat, like the others in Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3, carried 4 21-inch Mark 8 torpedoes, each weighing nearly 3,000 pounds, powerful enough to sink a destroyer with a single, well-placed hit. Each torpedo cost $10,000, more than most of these sailors would earn in a decade. Tonight, he had orders to use them. Intelligence reports were clear: a large Japanese reinforcement convoy was on its way, possibly 8 destroyers, loaded with troops and supplies for the embattled garrison. Hidden coast watchers in the surrounding jungle hills had spotted them hours earlier, reporting their movement south at nearly 30 knots. That meant they'd reach Tassafaronga within the hour. The PT boats represented something new, or perhaps, something old reborn. Small, fast, and wooden-hulled, they carried a crew of fewer than a dozen men but packed the killing power to threaten ships 1,000 times their size. Born of necessity after Pearl Harbor, these boats were cheap, quick to build, and expendable, but never ineffective. Their crews had learned to fight in silence. To drift, engines off, listening for the whine of enemy turbines. To fire torpedoes from less than 1,000 yards, point-blank range by destroyer standards. To exploit the arrogance of Japanese captains who never imagined such tiny boats could pose a mortal threat. Tonight would test whether those lessons meant survival or another night of failure. West checked his luminous watch: 2,300 hours. If the coast watchers were right, the enemy would appear soon. Around him, invisible in the dark, the other boats waited. The sea was calm. The air hung heavy with tropical humidity. Somewhere to the north, racing through the night, the Tokyo Express was coming. To understand why these fragile boats hunted destroyers in these waters, you have to understand the desperation of late 1942. 4 months earlier, on August 7th, the 1st Marine Division had stormed Guadalcanal in America's first major offensive of the Pacific War. Their objective: an airfield under construction near Lunga Point. The Marines seized it, renamed it Henderson Field, and in doing so, claimed a prize both sides would fight bitterly to hold. For the Japanese, Guadalcanal anchored the southern edge of their defensive line. Losing it would expose Rabaul, their regional stronghold, and open the path for an American push north. For the Americans, Henderson Field meant control of the skies, the only airbase within striking range of Rabaul. Whoever held that field would control the Central Solomons, and ultimately, the campaign itself. But control came with a price: supply. Both sides needed constant deliveries of food, fuel, and ammunition, yet neither could move safely by day. American air dominance from Henderson made daylight resupply suicidal for the Japanese. Conversely, Japanese air power from Rabaul still threatened any U.S. convoy foolish enough to sail under the sun. Thus was born the Tokyo Express, a nightly lifeline of Japanese destroyers racing down the slot, offloading supplies and troops in darkness, and fleeing before dawn. The method was brutal but effective. Supplies were packed into drums, rolled overboard, and floated to shore. Many burst open in the surf, spilling rice and ammunition into the sea. Troops waded ashore in the dark, often drowning when overloaded barges capsized or when they slipped from cargo nets into the black water. Still, inefficiency was better than starvation. And so, the Tokyo Express kept coming faster, more frequently, and with greater confidence. The Japanese destroyers were superbly crewed, masters of night combat, equipped with advanced optics and deadly discipline. American attempts to stop them at Cape Esperance, Savo Island, and the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal had ended in disaster. The U.S. Navy needed an answer. PT boats were that answer, not ideal, but available. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 arrived at Tulagi in October 1942 with 12 Elco 80-foot boats, built by the Electric Launch Company of Bayonne, New Jersey. They were lightweight, wooden, and fast, over 40 knots in calm water. Each carried 4 torpedoes and a handful of .50 caliber Browning machine guns. Doctrine said these boats were for ambushes, raids, and scouting, not duels with destroyers. But doctrine meant little here. The reality was brutal. The PTs were up against warships that outgunned, outranged, and outarmored them 10-1. Their Mark 8 torpedoes, while deadly, were flawed. They left visible wakes of bubbles. Their theoretical range of 6,000 yards was meaningless in practice. They had to fire from 1,000 yards or less. Built of mahogany and plywood, the PT boats were fast but fragile. A single 5-inch shell could rip through both sides of the hull. Their .50 calories could wound a destroyer's crew but never its armor. So they adapted. They learned to drift in total darkness, listening. To hide near shorelines and use the faint glow of the horizon to silhouette their prey. To fire, then vanish behind a curtain of smoke and spray. And most importantly, to accept failure. For weeks, their attacks achieved nothing. Torpedoes missed. Boats arrived late. Communications failed. They were mocked as expendable, barely even warships. Yet they kept going. By late November 1942, frustration ran deep. The Japanese were still resupplying nightly, their garrison growing stronger, while American crews risked death to no effect. But on November 30th, everything would change. Not because of new weapons or tactics, but because of circumstance. The PT boats would finally be in the right place, at the right time. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 had arrived at Tulagi aboard the seaplane tender USS Niagara on October 12, 1942. The 12 Elco 80-foot boats were divided into 2 divisions of 6, under Lieutenant Commander Alan Montgomery. West served as executive officer and division leader. Each boat was 80 feet long, 20 feet, 8 inches wide, a lattice of mahogany planking over white oak frames, fastened with bronze screws and copper rivets. 3 Packard 4M2500 engines, aircraft engines converted for marine use, powered them with aviation-grade gasoline. Each boat carried 3,000 gallons of fuel, enough for 12 hours of continuous operation. Armament: 4 21-inch Mark 8 torpedoes, 4.50 caliber machine guns, and a crew of 11 men, 2 officers, 9 enlisted. Training was short, often just 8 weeks at Melville, Rhode Island, before deployment. Many of these men had never been to sea before. They learned on the job, through mistakes that didn't kill them. Maintenance was constant. Salt, heat, and humidity tore through engines and hulls alike. With no dry docks or machine shops at Tulagi, repairs were made with plywood, glue, and faith. By late November, the boats were worn but functional, held together as much by determination as by hardware. Then came the sound, faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. Destroyers. West raised his hand, silence. The engines went dead. The night grew still. Then, the high-pitched whine of turbines at full speed. The Tokyo Express had arrived. West couldn't see them yet, the night was pitch black, clouds smothering even the stars, but he could hear them. He radioed a quiet contact report. Seconds later, the lookouts spotted shapes moving against the horizon. 1, 2, then many. At least 8 destroyers running in column at high speed. They were coming straight toward him. The geometry was perfect. At this course and speed, they'd pass within 1,000 yards. One chance. One shot. Engines at idle, he ordered. Prepare to fire. The Mark 8s were set for high speed, 36 knots, at 10 feet depth. Any shallower, and they might breach; any deeper, and they'd pass beneath their targets. The range closed fast, 3000. 2,000. 1,200 yards. Fire. Compressed air hissed. The first torpedo splashed free, then the second, the third. The fourth jammed briefly, cleared by hand and launched manually. Seconds later, PT-109's engines roared back to life. The boat turned hard to starboard, fleeing at full speed as searchlights stabbed through the dark. Other PTs fired 2 15 or 16 torpedoes streaking toward the Japanese line. Searchlights swept. Star shells burst overhead, turning night into magnesium daylight. 5-inch guns opened up, their orange flashes lighting the chaos. West weaved wildly, throttles wide open. Shells fell around them, geysers of water erupting close enough to drench the deck. Then explosions. 1, 2, 3. A towering column of fire rose from the nearest destroyer. Another ship shuddered under impact. Torpedoes had struck home. Moments later, the Japanese formation dissolved into confusion. Some destroyers turned to attack. Others veered away. Two collided in the dark, metal screaming as their hulls tore together. The PT boats raced south, engines screaming, laying smoke behind them. Star shells still burst overhead, but the return fire grew erratic, then ceased. When West finally circled back, he saw two destroyers dead in the water, one down by the bow, another listing hard to port. The Tokyo Express had been stopped, at least for tonight. The return to Tulagi took 2 hours. The boats cruised slow to conserve fuel. PT-109 had fired all 4 torpedoes, 300 rounds of ammunition, and taken no casualties. Another boat, PT-38, had been struck by a 5-inch shell that passed clean through its hull without exploding, a miracle. At Tulagi, officers were waiting. Debriefs began immediately. Reports conflicted, as they always did after night combat. Some swore they'd seen 6 hits, others 2. But one fact was clear. The PT boats had scored their first major victory against the Tokyo Express. Japanese reinforcements would not reach Guadalcanal that night. The cost? A few torpedoes, a few gallons of fuel, and one boat with a hull to patch by morning. For the men of Squadron 3, it was proof, fragile as their boats were, they could still strike a blow. The PT boats limped back to Tulagi under the first hints of dawn, engines sputtering, hulls battered, yet their crews carried a quiet satisfaction. Fuel and torpedoes would need replenishing, engines would demand inspection and maintenance. The men themselves craved food, sleep, a moment to shake off the adrenaline of the night, but there was little time to linger. Guadalcanal's rhythm allowed for neither celebration nor reflection. Victory in one engagement meant nothing more than survival until the next, and the next was always waiting. Coast watchers reported Japanese destroyers, heavily damaged, crawling north at reduced speed. Dawn brought intercepted radio chatter, fragments of hurried discussions about casualties and structural damage. Reconnaissance planes from Henderson Field photographed the crippled ships at Rabuel, confirming that fewer destroyers were ready for future Tokyo Express runs. The psychological toll on both sides was immediate and profound. For the Japanese, the revelation was harsh. The once dominant night runs of their destroyers were no longer invulnerable. Tiny motor torpedo boats, fragile and modestly armed, could strike without warning, turning routine supply missions into calculated risks. For the Americans, the success reaffirmed the PT boats' potential. Even in their limited numbers and with their fragile wooden hulls, they could influence the campaign when used intelligently. Commander Montgomery filed his report on December 2. Professional, measured, and precise, he acknowledged both the triumphs and the limitations of the attack. Favorable tactical geometry, the cover of a moonless night, and the Japanese formation's reckless speed had aligned to make success possible. He cautioned against assuming future victories would come as easily but recommended increased patrols and additional PT boats in the Guadalcanal area. The November 30 engagement at Takafaranga did not end the campaign, but it transformed the Japanese approach to supply operations. The Imperial Navy, reliant on speed and night-fighting superiority, had to confront a new reality. Small, inexpensive torpedo boats could inflict serious damage on destroyers that had seemed untouchable. Post-war records revealed the losses. Takanami sunk with 197 men, Naganami with her bow shattered in 3 weeks of repairs ahead, Machinami damaged but afloat. Over 300 casualties, a crippling blow for what was meant to be routine. Japan adapted. Destroyer captains slowed their approach to Guadalcanal, deployed extra lookouts scanning for torpedo wakes, and added depth charges and small-caliber guns to counter PT boats. Heavier cruisers replaced destroyers on some runs, and submarines were pressed into daylight supply runs, carrying critical stores in their torpedo rooms. Barges and small cargo ships attempted the runs, accepting heavy losses in hopes some would survive. Yet Guadalcanal remained a logistical nightmare, a remote outpost at the end of an ever-threatened supply line. The PT boats were only one threat, but they forced the Japanese to divert attention and resources they could ill afford to lose. America responded in kind. Squadron 2 arrived at Tulagi in early December, followed by Squadron 6 in January. By February, over 30 PT boats prowled the Solomons nightly. Mechanical failures, coral damage, evaporating fuel, and tropical diseases like malaria tested the men and vessels relentlessly, but they kept operating. Their cumulative effect on Japanese supply operations was undeniable. By January 1943, Tokyo Express runs delivered roughly 40% less cargo than in October. Even when attacks failed, the PT boats forced the Japanese to expend time, fuel, and ammunition defensively, slowing unloading, disrupting schedules, and sowing anxiety. Cost was minimal for the Americans. Each PT boat, roughly $200,000 to build, 1% of a Fletcher-class destroyer, carried torpedoes cheaper than equivalent naval bombardment. Minimal training sufficed for crews, yet their impact was profound. The November 30th success set a precedent. PT boat patrols became systematic, coordinated, and relentless. Encounters remained unpredictable. On December 3 off Cape Esperance, Japanese destroyers bristling with lookouts and gunners turned the tables. PT boats were spotted, fired upon, and 2 damaged. Attacks were rushed and ineffective. Lessons were learned, adaptations made, but the overarching trend favored the Americans. Destroyers faced a stark choice: speed or vigilance. Time spent evading torpedoes was time lost unloading supplies. Ammunition spent on PT boats was ammunition unavailable for Henderson Field or naval battles. By December 11, improved tactics bore fruit. 8 PT boats, attacking in 3 coordinated divisions, struck 2 Japanese destroyers with torpedoes. Chaos unfolded aboard the enemy formation, multiple searchlights, scattered fire, and 3 torpedoes finding their marks. 1 destroyer dead in the water, another crippled and flooding. Successes and failures alike continued through December. Some attacks produced damage, others ended in near misses, but the cumulative effect was crushing. By late December, Japanese commanders confronted impossible choices. Continue risking destroyers and crews? Accept higher losses for the garrison's survival? Or begin withdrawal? The decision dragged into January. Supplies could not reach 30,000 men in combat readiness while enduring constant attacks, and the garrison's troops slowly starved, malaria, dysentery, and malnutrition claiming more lives than combat. PT boats alone did not seal Guadalcanal's fate. Henderson Field, American air power, and relentless ground pressure were decisive. Yet the small, wooden boats had stripped the Japanese of a vital advantage: night supply runs previously considered safe. Even the Imperial Navy's finest destroyers had to respect their presence. By February 1943, the Japanese High Command conceded defeat. The final Tokyo Express missions became evacuations, racing under darkness to extract survivors. Over 3 nights, approximately 11,000 men were rescued, leaving the dead, equipment, and illusions behind. PT boats shadowed these operations, attacking when possible, though the destroyers, unburdened by cargo, were harder targets. Some PT attacks forced abandoned pickup points, leaving hundreds behind. Lieutenant Westholm continued to command PT-109 until February, when he was reassigned and replaced by Lieutenant John Kennedy, destined for fame later that year when PT-109 was rammed in Blackett Strait. These officers and their men navigated a fine line between success and catastrophe nightly. The Guadalcanal PT operations demonstrated that small, inexpensive, minimally crewed boats could influence naval campaigns when deployed intelligently. The lessons echoed across the Pacific War. PT squadrons expanded, over 500 boats were built, and while never decisive alone, their cumulative pressure diverted enemy resources, disrupted operations, and forced the Japanese to respect what had once seemed inconsequential. The men who survived carried vivid memories: silent drifting through darkness, engines roaring to life in sudden bursts, shells whistling overhead, torpedoes striking distant hulls, the oppressive tropical heat, gasoline fumes, repetitive rations, letters from home, and the agonizing boredom of waiting for nightfall. Reports claiming 38 transports sunk in 2 weeks were exaggerated, but the true achievement, the courage, timing, and audacity remained undeniable. On the night of November 30, 1942, Lieutenant Westholm and his fellow PT boat commanders discovered that with courage, skill, and a little luck, even wooden boats could challenge the might of an empire. Guadalcanal would ultimately be won by Marines, pilots, cruisers, and supply ships, but the PT boats had carved their mark in the darkness, proving that audacity and precision could tilt the scales in war. That lesson would reverberate throughout the Pacific and beyond.